Hello, everyone. Welcome to the CLIMAAX Handbook Overview webinar. We see that there are a few people still joining, but maybe we can slowly get going. So you're very familiar with CLIMAAX as one of the projects under the mission adaptation. And as you know, there will be the start of your participation in the project. We're very happy that you will be joining the project, that you've been successful in being awarding the cascading funds. And so through this webinar, we will give you an introduction to the resources that the project has been developing in its first year and a half. And so essentially the entry point is the so-called CLIMAAX Handbook. So maybe if we could look at the program of the webinar. If you can go on, David, thank you very much. So I'm just stepping in for Dana. She is our project manager, and unfortunately she was having some technical difficulties in joining the webinar. So bear with us, we just kind of rearranged on the fly. So I really won't take up any more time with welcoming remarks. I would just like to walk you through the program. So first we'll have Erika Melendez, and she will be opening with a few comments about the beginning of your contracts and how this process will initiate for you. And then we have some presentations that get into some of the substance of the resources that the project has been developing. So Michaela Bachmann and I will be presenting to you the CLIMAAX framework, and I will go into some of the details related to one of the pillars of the framework related to technical choices. And then Christopher Polster will talk about the toolbox. He'll do a demonstration for you. And Erika will come back and she will show you an example, a worked example of using the toolbox. And we hope that these presentations will really help in clarifying the technical requirements of the projects. And we're ready to answer questions at the end of the presentations. So with that, I hand the floor. Oh, just some housekeeping. Thank you, Davide. Just to inform you that the session is recorded, and you can raise your hand to ask a question, but you can also write questions throughout the presentations. You see there's a question and answer box, and we can also reply in writing during the discussions. So I think, Erika, first, you were going to give a few words, or maybe that I'm wrong. I give you the floor.
Yes, thank you. This is just going to be a quick comment on it. Like Anna just mentioned, Dana, which is from the project management team, she was not able to join, but she will try to join in the process. And from my side, my name is Erika, and I'm from the Universitat Politécnica de Catalunya. It's just basically a reminder that in the next few days, we will be contacting you to formalize the subgrant agreement process and help you in all the requirements that are needed. When the time comes, we will be contacting you. And if you have any questions in the meantime, of course, you can always reach out to us. So this is just a quick reminder of that. And I will give the floor to, I think it's Michaela, to start with the, exactly.
Yes, hello everyone. I hope you can see and hear me. I will wait for the presentation to start. Yes, perfect. So hello everyone. My name is Michaela. I'm working at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, and we have been co-leading the development of the CLIMAAX framework together with our other colleagues and partners of the CLIMAAX project. And yeah, I will dive a bit deeper in this now. You probably have a strong interest in the risk quantification and in the risk workflows, but the CLIMAAX project really wants to emphasize also the context that is needed before and after doing such a climate risk assessment. So in simpler terms, a climate risk assessment really needs and profits from more than just risk quantification. Drawing from the latest state-of-the-art science, we developed a 5-step climate risk assessment framework that was also co-developed and evaluated by our 5 pilot regions. The 5 steps are scoping, risk exploration, risk analysis, key risk assessment, and monitoring and evaluation. And before going into more detail about these 5 steps, I would like to draw your attention to the conceptual background, which is basically informing these steps. So we have the principles, technical choices, and participatory processes here in red. The participatory processes, as you can see, they are really central and at the heart of the climate risk assessment framework. For the principles, it is important to think about how the principles can be included throughout the steps, and most importantly in the scoping step, but then being applied throughout the other 5 steps. So we have social justice, equity, and inclusivity, for example. It's important to think about quality, rigor, and transparency, and also keep in mind the precautionary approach. Then the technical choices, the technical choices. We have some contextual information about climate change scenarios and models, and how to choose them. Some information for you to guide you through this decision. Then we also have information about the global warming levels, the choice of time horizon, and the integration of local data, which helps you to go from the scoping risk exploration to the more practical risk analysis. And finally, the participatory processes in the very center of the CLIMAAX framework comprise of the 3 processes: learning, communication, and consultation, which should really be emphasized throughout the whole climate risk assessment cycle. Now, coming back to the 5 operational steps, I would now like to explain them in a bit more detail. This would be the big climate risk assessment cycle with all the sub steps and with a lot more detail. So for the scoping, a comprehensive climate risk assessment heavily profits from the scoping, as it builds a firm foundation for this risk assessment. And without going into too many technical or climate related hazard details, it's important to set clear objectives as a first sub-step, then understand the context of the climate risk assessment in the sense of where it comes from and which space it will inform. And finally, to decide on the extent of the participation of the participatory process and the allocation of risk ownership. The risk exploration step then dives a bit deeper in the climate-related hazard and risk part. It might be helpful to imagine the second step going from the first to the second step as a funnel, which really goes into more detail step by step, from the more broader scoping step to step by step more detail in the risk exploration step. So for this step, it will be possible to screen risks through, for example, maps that we provide, or also through consulting experts that you may have. And following that, a region or community may choose the relevant workflows, and finally also choose the relevant climate scenarios. The risk analysis step applies these risk workflows, and this step is therefore heavily influenced by by these two first steps that I just mentioned, the scoping and the risk exploration step. I will not, again, not go into detail here, also because the risk workflows will be presented by my colleagues, or the logic behind it will be presented by my colleagues. But there is a general structure. So first, the user should prepare the application, followed by choosing and accessing data, which then allows to estimate the hazard. And this hazard estimation will be finally combined with exposure and vulnerability data. The next step, the key risk assessment step, evaluates this risk outcome that has been estimated in the risk analysis step through applying the workflows. And by bringing in stakeholders, experts, vulnerable groups, or any important people and groups that you consider, the risk outcome can be evaluated according to risk severity and risk urgency. And this finally results in a risk ranking where key risks and less urgent risks are assigned. The last step, monitoring and evaluation, finally aims at two steps: monitoring climate risks that are key or also less urgent, as we just heard, but also evaluating the climate risk assessment process itself. And in this step, you can gather additional data, knowledge, or practices which might be helpful for another recurrent climate risk assessment cycle. And you may now ask, what happens to these key and less urgent risks? The CLIMAAX framework and project does not really focus on climate risk management or adaptation practices. This is being done by other projects, such as, for example, the Pathways to Resilience project, P2R. But it is important to provide a link to the climate risk management sphere, also because climate risk management and adaptation practices may feed back into the climate risk assessment itself. So the main idea here is that the key risks are seen as an entry point to climate risk management, and their realization, for example, through facilitating adaptation measures or generally building resilience, may then feed back into the climate risk assessment, or in this case, monitoring and evaluation step. And yeah, this ideally also decreases the risk that you face then. This was it from my side. Thanks a lot. And I'm looking forward to any questions that you may have afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Michaela, for that brilliant presentation. I hope you got a very nice impression of the comprehensive framework that we have developed. I will just pick up on essentially a part of that framework. I will give a flavor of the elements that are part of the pillar on technical choices. And I introduced my colleagues from the Euro-Mediterranean Centre on Climate Change, but also this work has clearly been developed with Michaela's team and other partners, but very much in conversation with the pilots that we have been working with in this first phase. So if we go to the next slide, you know that risk is, just one more click, please, and another one, thank you. So that when we assess climate-related risk, we are looking first on the right-hand side of the slide, we're linking multiple climatic impact drivers or hazards with the societal and ecosystem vulnerabilities and exposure. And we are also now trying to incorporate more of the consequences of climate change action. So, for example, mitigation, or, for example, if you're looking at land use practices that are orientated around reducing emissions, they may also have consequences for risk, other risk dimensions. And I will mainly focus on the implications of looking at future risks. So on the left-hand side, you see some, just going back, you see how the hazards have been assessed in the latest IPCC reports to be changing with increasing global warming. So they're becoming larger in magnitude, they're increasing in frequency, they're occurring in new locations, different timings, and there are new combinations of these hazards that are emerging. So we need to think about not only current risks, but also into the future, considering climate change. So the choices, if we go on to the next slide, I will start illustrating some of the choices that are related to looking at future risk. For example, if we look at this slide of increasing surface warming in Europe with time, you see that Europe will continue to warm this century. We have different scenarios that are based on socioeconomic futures. They have different degrees of emissions associated with these scenarios that lead to low warming outcomes or higher warming outcomes. And so when we look into the future, we need to decide which scenario we should be using to assess risk. So if we look at the next slide, so on the whole, we suggest that looking at high or very high-end emission scenarios, it's very useful to explore future high-risk outcomes. But then comparing these projected changes, and we look at anomalies to really exemplify the changes that are happening and understand them more clearly. We would compare to pre-industrial conditions, to the historical conditions, or for example, a low-end emission scenario. And it can help you consider possible future outcomes in your context and assess different strategies of adaptation going forwards. So the comparison with more moderate risk outcomes can be useful to really demonstrate the benefit also of reducing emissions and not only look at the worst case outcome. So if we look at the next slide, you might have noticed in the first figure I showed you with the future scenarios, actually the differences between the scenarios is more apparent by the mid-century. So what would you do in your context if you need to communicate to policymakers and your communities the importance of taking preventative measures and adaptation measures to manage risk? How would you do that if these scenarios are not demonstrating large differences, for example, in the next decades? So in this case, it's not so much the scenario choice that matters, but you see how much variability there is in the future projections. And so you also see there is nonetheless an increasing trend in the surface warming. So there's certainly implications for assessing climate risk and the possible adaptation measures you would want to develop and promote. So if we go on to the next slide. Another aspect to consider when you're making your technical choices is using information that comes from climate models that are forced with the scenarios. You would need to consider how the climate processes in your region are being represented by the models. So this is model uncertainty. And here you see an example of, I actually need to check what the variable is. So it's projected changes in summer precipitation. On the left-hand side, you see what a global climate model produces in the Alps region. And on the right-hand side, you see the downscale, the dynamically downscaled regional climate model results. So how models are representing processes where perhaps you have complex topography or strong contrasts in land use and things like that. You may want to be using, for example, the Eurocordex simulations. Global climate models are typically on a scale of around 200 kilometers horizontally, whereas the regional climate models in Europe for Cordex, they reach up to 12.5 kilometer resolutions. So if we go on to the next slide. These elements that I've illustrated for you show that we have uncertainties in our future projections. That's why we would look at different scenarios to know, we don't know how the future will look like really. None of these are predictions, they are just possible outcomes. You saw that the models can have uncertainties, And so how do we communicate this information? You should not consider a model projection, like one simulation, as an outcome. It's just a possible outcome. So it's really important to use an ensemble of model projections to explore the robustness of these features of future climate. If you click through again for me, Davide, you see that you can use, for example, the median of the distribution of these models to give a best estimate. And it's an element of a best estimate, shall we say, whereas the spread would indicate the uncertainty that we have in these projections. You see here the 90th quantile, the upper range, could be used to demonstrate a worst case outcome for this set of model simulations. So in the next slide, just one more click. Just in summary, we really, in this work to assess future climate risk, we really need to consider how we develop reliable or complete regional climate information. I've illustrated some of the dimensions that go into the technical choices to undertake this assessment. And obviously your choices will need to depend on the questions that you are trying to address, your context. And it also needs to consider, for example, uncertainties in how models represent climates in your region. So it's really important to assemble all the lines of evidence that we have to assess future regional climate change. And this includes models, but it also includes observations. You know, there are multiple observational data sets as well. So really using all the resources available is an important consideration. And then studying how these products represent past, current, and then you could assess how they represent future climate change. And finally, you would assess the overall robustness of the climate change information based on these multiple lines of evidence. So I stop there and I hand over to Christopher, who's just come on. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Hello, my name is Christopher Polster. I'm from the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasting, and I would like to give an introduction into a bit more of the technical aspects of the handbook in terms of how it's implemented and how you can access the resources that are made available there. So the handbook itself is a website that we have compiled. You can find it already online right now if you go to handbook.climax.eu. And this resource is open to everyone, irrespective of their status or relationship with the CLIMAAX project. As I mentioned, it is the major climate risk assessment resource that is being compiled by the risk assessment experts in CLIMAAX. And it is supposed to provide both conceptual and technical guidance on how to do climate risk assessment. But we're also incorporating experience from the participating regions. So at the moment, we're preparing some storylines from the pilots that you will soon see on the website. And this is really a theme that I would like to highlight here, that our handbook is a working document. So you're not seeing the finished version yet on the website, but this continues to evolve as we gain experience throughout the CLIMAAX project, and will sort of remain as a legacy of the project later on as well. And I'd like to introduce you a bit to the main pieces of content we have there already. And you've already seen the framework by Michaela earlier. And you will find these information in writing as well, including all the illustrations, references to literature, and the guiding questions that can take you to the process of the framework in a step-by-step way on that web page. So this is the first major block of content, and the second block are our CLIMAAX workflows. On the next slide, thank you, which are essentially the implementation of the third step in the framework, which is the risk analysis. And this is where the computation of risk as sort of the product of hazard, exposure, and vulnerability is really executed in a quantitative way based on data sets. We have these workflows on the website grouped by hazard. You can see the hazards we have here on the right. And there can be multiple workflows per hazard that focus on different aspects. For example, for droughts, we have one workflow focusing on the population exposed to drought, and then one workflow focusing on agricultural losses that can result from droughts. All of these workflows, though, are not sort of, well, not a one-stop shop, right? They're not already completed. You will find a working example of the entire workflow on the website, but it's meant to be used as a starting point. So providing sort of building blocks and examples that can be adapted to the local context. And this is really an important thing. But one thing that's sort of common with all the workflows is the basic structure, where we start with an introduction, explaining which risk is assessed, the methodology, the data sets, going to first a hazard assessment and then a risk assessment. And you will see a more practical example by Erica in the next presentation. But for now, I'd like to focus a bit more on how this is being implemented by us and what the technical requirements are of actually interacting with these workflows. Because as you see them on the website, they're essentially just static renderings of one example of how to apply this workflow. And on the next slide, you will see that the technical solution we've picked for that is that these workflows are implemented in the Python programming language, which means that this gives us a lot of flexibility to modify things, to extend things, and to adapt it. We present these workflows in the form of Jupyter notebooks, where all the data retrieval, processing, and visualization is sort of combined into one file together with the documentation, the code itself, and then also the output of the code, which makes it very convenient to interactively work with these workflows. And we try to use standard data formats as much as we can. So usually you will find the data either as a netcdf or a geotiff or similar formats. So that if you, for example, want to substitute a local data set because you have maybe a more up-to-date one that we are not aware of, or maybe you have some higher resolution data, then you should be relatively easily able to do that. But as I said, on the website, you just see sort of static incarnations of these workflows. In order to actually interact with them, you need to run them on some computing infrastructure. And you can get all of our workflows. You can go from the handbook to our GitHub, and there you will find it. And then you will need to run it either on your local computer, or you can use the Jupyter Hub that we are maintaining within CLIMAAX. And at this point, I want to highlight again that this entire chain from our handbook over to GitHub, over to the notebooks, this is all open, based on open source software. So you don't need a MATLAB license or anything else. All of this is freely available. The Python and all the packages, they are free to use. So our entire sort of tech stack is open, and all the workflows are open. So there's no costs or something that you incur while using these workflows. And I want to say a bit more about this Jupyter Hub that we are providing. So this is computing and storage that we provide in the cloud and that we maintain within the CLIMAAX project for the participants of CLIMAAX. And the goal is here to provide a ready-to-use environment where all the software you need in order to run the workflows is already pre-installed. And actually, we already prepare the workflows for you there. So you don't even need to go to GitHub anymore. It's once you log in, you will already find all of the workflows or a copy of them in your space. As I said, there's storage attached, so you can also upload your own data and then interact with the notebooks and sort of adapt them to what you want if you want to use this environment rather than running it locally. But if you want to run it locally, we also provide instructions on how to set up the computing environment yourself, if that's what you prefer. And because these things can be a bit of a technical challenge, we also provide support in the form of a support desk, both for technical aspects of the Jupyter Hub, but also all the contents of the handbook. Regarding the workflows and the framework. But there will be a separate introduction. You will receive more information about this in the coming weeks. At the moment, we are still testing this infrastructure to make sure that it is ready for you. I'm just going to quickly mention that there's also going to be a public forum for sort of general community exchange. You can interact with us via GitHub as well. If you want to contribute to a workflow or maybe have devised your own workflow, we're happy to receive those things. And we will be updating the handbook documentation based on our experiences from the support and our interactions with you. So finally, to summarize, again, in the handbook, you can find the frameworks, you find the workflows, you find documentation around the workflows, both on the data and the methods being used, but also on some technical things. Plus, what I don't have on here is also, you will find some of the experiences soon from our pilots, for example. But in order to interact with these workflows, as you will see on the next slide, you will have to sort of go through our GitHub, but that is linked in the handbook, and then need to find some place to run it, which is either your local environment that you can set up with our instructions, or on the Jupyter Hub that we provide via CLIMAAX. And in the next step, if you need some help with that, we provide support for both the contents of the handbook. So if you have questions about the conceptual framework, or if you have questions about the workflows, or if you have questions about sort of technical aspects, maybe something isn't working for you in the Jupyter Hub, you can contact us via the service desk. And in the last step, as I mentioned, this is a sort of a living document. So if we go to one more slide, yeah, thank you. You will find that we take the feedback and the experiences from you that we see, maybe the things that some of you are struggling with, maybe the things that are going very well, and we are sort of feeding them back into the handbook and updating it throughout the project lifetime in order to improve the quality of this resource. And as I said, we are happy to receive so contributions from you there, because you really have the local knowledge. And you will see that some of the workflows currently rely on data sets where you might have even better versions of. And yeah, with that, I'm handing over to Erika, which will give you a regional example for an application of a workflow. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I will be presenting the workflow of heavy rainfall or extreme precipitation that we have developed within the CLIMAAX project. Because of time constraints, and the idea is not to go too technical on this presentation, I will be presenting the example more in an illustrative way, the results that we actually got from implementing the workflow. I will not show the code. I don't think all of us wants to actually see the code of it. But like Christopher just mentioned, this is all public in the handbook. And actually the example that I'm about to present, the results and all the steps that have been taken out for this illustration are there. So they're public. And the idea is that it will help you have an inspiration of what you can actually do if you carry out the workflow of the extreme precipitation. And as well, it can also help you as a support and as a foundation for your own local risk assessment. So as we can see in this slide, the motivation behind including an extreme precipitation or heavy rainfall workflow within the CLIMAAX project was the idea that in a urban environment and in a regional scale as well, we have seen that extreme precipitation is usually linked to high impacts or significant impacts that can cause a lot of losses or a lot of disruption in a local environment. So we wanted to provide information on how this type of events will change in the future, if they will be more frequent, if the magnitudes that are causing this type of events are going to increase or not, in order for authorities or municipalities or institutions can assess this and make adaptation measures accordingly to the expected impact, right? So if you can go to the next slide, please. Yes, so behind this idea and what I've been explaining right now, that in a urban environment, we have this type of events, we have realized, we're working on the workflow, that there are two situations that can happen. The first of all, and this is actually a real example in the Catalonia region, and again, because of the format of the presentation, I have put everything here in one slide. But if you can see in the upper left side of the presentation, we have a local point, which is usually a vulnerable point within a urban area. This is actually a roundabout that usually gets flooded after a specific intensity has been surpassed. In this case, is 30 millimeters in 30 minutes. So what we understand is that after this precipitation is observed, we're gonna start seeing impacts in an area, in this case that the roundabout is flooded. And this is linked to a frequency of how many times per year or in a specific time frame we can expect this type of impacts. In this case, it's 10-year return period. I'm trying to explain this in a literal way, but it's a lot of concept behind it. And the idea is that, okay, this is our critical threshold in terms of extreme precipitation, and it causes this particular impact. So in a climate change scenario, the idea would be, okay, if I would like to keep this magnitude in the future, how will the frequency change? In this particular example, we see that instead of 10 years, it's 2 years. So as you can see on the right side in this graph, we have our current critical rainfall threshold. And in the future, if we want to keep the same intensity, because we know that we cannot sustain more amount of rainfall than this, we will see this event to be more frequent. This type of impacts then will be more frequent. If you can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, there you go. Oh, I think you have to go back to the other one. Yes. Yeah, okay. So this is the example that I just mentioned. It was a magnitude, a frequency. So how many times per specific time frame we're going to see this type of event. But what if we want to keep the same frequency, because we realize that it's unsustainable and it's not tolerable that in our area, in our city, we have this type of flooding or this type of extreme precipitation causing this impact in this time frame. Okay, so if we want to keep the same frequency, probably in a climate change scenario context, for the same frequency, we're going to have a higher magnitude, or the event is going to be more intense. So as you can see in the graph, for the same frequency, the one that is causing this type of flooding in the roundabout, we're going to have a bigger magnitude. But we know that the one that we can only sustain at this moment with the measures that we have in place is 30 millimeters in 30 minutes. So we have an exceedance of this magnitude. So in a climate change scenario, the idea behind the extreme precipitation or the heavy rainfall workflow is to understand what will be the changes in frequency and magnitude of these critical thresholds that are linked to impacts. And these impacts have been derived because of vulnerability and exposure in the area. So how can we understand this frequency and magnitude to hopefully think of the adaptation measures in order to sustain this type of exceedances? Can you go on the next slide, please? And the idea behind it is that because in a urban context, this case of the roundabout is just one of so many that we have in a city. We can have low points in a city context, like the roads that go behind a bridge. We can have crossroads that we can see in these images. We can have vulnerable points. And all of these usually have a specific critical threshold linked to impacts that we cannot sustain if these are exceeded. Next, please. And this is, of course, in a local context, but in a regional context, we usually also have early warning systems or warning, as you can see, for example, sometimes in the news that there is a red warning because an exceedance of a threshold, which is linked to an extreme precipitation and impacts. So usually we also have this type of examples as well. And the idea is to understand how all of this will change in terms of climate, in the climate context. So next, please. So having all this in mind, we developed the structure of the extreme precipitation workflow. It follows basically the same guidelines as it was explained by Christopher, an introduction, hazard, and risk. And the first part of the extreme precipitation workflow is to guide you, the users, and the people that are using the workflow into developing critical rainfall thresholds. So all this that I mentioned before, understanding what is the limit or identifying what is the limit of extreme precipitation that can be sustained in a local point or a regional aspect. So we have a guidance that goes step by step, literally to derive this if you don't have them. And here's the illustration that this is based on the risk tolerance. So we have or acceptable, tolerable, and unacceptable region, which are linked to impacts. So all this is live on the website. Next, please. We have the second pillar of the frame of the workflow, which is calculating the expected precipitation for different duration and frequency. So try to understand what is the precipitation in your area, calculating the return periods or the frequencies, and also not only for the current climate, but for future climate scenarios. In this case, the workflow uses Cordex. But I want to reiterate that the workflow has been done in an adaptable way in order for you to use the scenarios and the combinations that you would like to try out, just as Anna mentioned, that there's different combinations that you can use. So the workflow itself is flexible enough for that. And the third pillar, if you go next, please. And the third pillar is the risk assessment. So the idea that, okay, we have our critical thresholds that we have identified that are based on impacts, and we want to understand, okay, how are they going to change? For example, in this case, what will be the new frequency or the return period for my critical threshold? Is it going to be more frequent, this type of events? Do I expect that the impacts are going to happen now almost every year, or what? This type of idea behind it. So the workflow itself has these three pillars, and we have done some pre-calculations for you not to have to calculate everything. We have done some combinations of climate scenarios. We have already some data sets of precipitation in a pan-European scale. But as Christopher mentioned, if you have local data, of course, this can also be introduced, and actually it can help you have more meaningful results. So if you go next, please. In this case, I will briefly in an illustrative way showcase the results that we actually had for the Catalonia region, going through all the steps of the workflow that we just developed and also including their local data. So next, please. Just a brief example, a brief introduction, sorry, of what we've done in Catalonia. What we did is that with the local partners, so end users from the CLIMAAX project representing the Catalonia partners, we developed this risk assessment. They wanted to understand in their area how their thresholds were going to change. So in this case, Catalonia is highly vulnerable to extreme rainfall events. And because of that, the Meteorological Service of Catalonia issues warnings for dangerous meteorological situations due to rainfall using two critical thresholds. So the thresholds that I mentioned before. In here, it actually says low, but it's low medium, like low/medium risk. And this is associated with 100 millimeters in 24 hours. And then the high risk is 200 millimeters in 24 hours. So as you can see, we have here a threshold that is already linked to impacts, sort of. And it has the magnitude, the duration, and the frequency that it was provided to us by the Catalonia region. So the idea that we were discussing with Catalonia partners in this whole time that we were carrying out the risk assessment was to identify how these critical thresholds were going to vary in the context of climate scenarios. So if you go next. And the workflow itself, because we know that we need regional and local examples, we also did the same procedure for a small, well, I'm not saying small, but a city here in Catalonia that's called Blanes. From a previous work that we've done in the area, we already knew what were their critical impact-based rainfall thresholds, so this idea. So we set it up with the Catalonia partners to 100 millimeters in 24 hours as well. So we did two examples, a regional and a local example. Again, this in the handbook is showcased separately. So if you're interested only in a really small area or in a really small location, you can adapt and you can follow the workflow towards that end. Or if you're more interested in a regional or more larger scale exercise, the workflow also mentions the steps towards carrying that out. So next, please. So following the structure, in this case, it's pretty straightforward because we already had this critical rainfall thresholds. Like I mentioned before, we had the 200 millimeters and then 100 millimeters in 24 hours. And then the one of Blanes as well. So basically, this step was just to reiterate what we were discussing with them. But if not, the steps we're going to be followed from this particular pillar. Next, please. Next. Yes, and then the second pillar, we did the calculation of the expected precipitation for different durations and frequencies. Here was mostly to understand the rainfall and the frequencies in the Catalonia region. So here on the left, you see the 24-hour precipitation for a 10-year return period for the years of 1976 to 2005. So current/past precipitation. We have this information, and the workflow also helps you calculate this type of information for different periods in the future. So in this case, we calculated for 2041 and 2070 for this particular example. And as you can see on the right side, we have a more, I would say, useful map, because it not only shows you the precipitation, but the relative change between what is present and what could be expected in the future. So here you can see from 2005, what will be the difference until 2070. So the change in magnitude. The color scale and everything that you see here is adaptable. This was only because we did it with the Catalonia region, but the colors and everything can be changed, and the percentages as well. So in this, and the one of the right side, you can quickly observe where are the areas where precipitation is going to increase in comparison to 2005, which areas you can locate. So this is something that you can do with the workflow. Next, please. And then the third pillar, which is assessing the changes of frequency and magnitude of this impact based rainfall threshold. So here on the left, we see the return periods or frequency of this critical threshold of 100 millimeters in 24 hours from 1976 to 2005. And on the right side, we see it, but for 2040 and 2070, based on the RCP of 8.5. So as you can see, again, the color scheme can be changed. But as you can see in the present, we have some areas where the frequency of return periods are from 100, 150 to 100. So this area that is mostly red. But in the future, the frequency is changing towards increasing. So instead of having a return period or frequency of 100 or 150, it's changing to 20, 35, 50. So basically what it means is that this critical threshold that is for us important because it can link to specific impacts in the future, instead of having this with a frequency of 100 years, it's actually going to become more frequent. So something that we can already see in the present moment, that this type of extreme events are going to become normal in some areas. So this is one of the analysis that can be done from the risk workflow. And next, please. And because we also did it for Blanes, this was the original example, and for Blanes, the workflow itself, actually, this is the literal answer that you would get from the workflow. And this analysis that can help you understand what could happen. And it's that if we want to maintain the current magnitude, like we want to keep the same threshold that we have right now, the return period will change from 5 to 3 years. This is not a massive change because it is what it is. This is the area that we chose with them. It's not like on the other side with the massive changes from 100 to 35 or so, but it can give you already an idea of, okay, so if this is the intensity that I can sustain on my critical point or in my area, if I want to keep the same one, because this is the maximum that I can accept, then I will have to accept that the frequency will change. In this case, it's 5 to 3. Next, please. And then we have this map that was the relative magnitude shift. So which areas of Catalonia are going to be more precipitation in 2070 comparison to 2005. And it's something really interesting that we were analyzing with partners in Catalonia, because if you see that area that in the previous map, it was red because the frequencies were going to increase, it's also the same area where the precipitations are also going to increase. So not only the events are going to become, extreme events are going to become more normal, but they're going to be associated with higher intensities and higher magnitudes, at least in this area. Next, please. And finally, because we also had the specific example of Blanes, the literal output from the workflow would be, if you want to maintain the same return period, like the same frequency, because in this case, you analyze it and you say from a return period of 5 to 3 years, unacceptable. I want to have it 5 years. That is my frequency of this magnitude. Okay, so if you want to keep the same frequency, then you have to accept that the magnitude will increase by 19% from your current critical threshold. So here you have two things that you have to consider for adaptation measures. The frequency will change and the magnitude will change if you keep one of those fixed. This can help you understand or analyze, okay, what of the two are unacceptable, if the two of them are unacceptable, and what are the adaptation measures that you want to design or propose to sustain this type of thresholds that, again, are linked to specific impacts that are intolerable based on the risk tolerance terminology that I explained before. This is basically the example that we've done with Catalonia. All of this is live in the handbook, all the examples, and like Christopher mentioned, this is a live document. So we are going to be feeding the workflow with other examples from other regions in a different perspective, so you can get inspired and understand and explore what are the different ways that you can do a risk assessment with this workflow and the rest that we have available. Thank you.
Thank you, Erika, for that very comprehensive presentation. I would like to invite Dana Stuparu to come in. According to our plans, she will moderate the question and answer session, but I just want to check that, Dana, you can come in and there aren't any technical problems.
Hello.
Here you are, great. So Dana is the project manager of CLIMAAX, and I hand over the floor to you also to introduce yourself properly. And I wanted to say I've responded to some of the questions in writing in the question and answer box, but there are a few that remain, and maybe I indicate them to you so you maybe pick them up in the discussion. And yeah, I'm happy to help if needed. Over to you.
All right. Thank you, Anna. I hope you can hear me. Excuse me for being late and not being able to join at the start of the meeting. So let me just take 2 minutes to welcome you to the project. My name is Dana Stuparu. I'm a climate advisor at Deltares, and together with Frederic Spernavailand and Dan from Deltares and Daniel Semperetores from Polytechnic University of Barcelona, we are coordinating this project. So thank you, Anna, for taking over the coordination of this meeting while myself not being able to connect. The main goal, just me quickly summarize the main goal of this meeting, and then we can go to the questions. What we aimed with this meeting is for you to have a better understanding of the main elements of the climate risk assessment framework and the available frameworks and the available workflows. And we think that it is really important for you to understand this, and we also encourage you to have another look at the presentation or the available information on the website, because most of you are now forming your teams, so it is really, really important to understand what type of expertise it is needed for you to be able to have a successful project. And also what type of skills are needed for the subconsultants. In a nutshell, the project is not very complex, and what we ask of you is that you apply the common methodology framework that was presented by Michaela and the workflows. And the aim is for you to get a common assessments of the current risks and how the risks can change in the future. And then you can refine the analysis with your local data and local knowledge. And you can use this information afterwards to prepare for the next plans. And you can say to your political environment or to your colleagues at the municipalities that this methodology and these insights have been developed during a methodology that was recognized and approved by the European Commission, and then you can take next steps. So you can start identifying what to do about it. We are very glad to see a large group of attendees. And as it was mentioned a few times, we also have a lineup of support from the autumn onwards, so that you can you can start really the activities. But yeah, we are really looking forward to the project and to learn from you as well, get to know you, and hopefully we're going to have a very nice outcome together. So yeah, we have a bit of more minutes, so let me also check the Q&A. Thank you for the team that has already answered questions. Let me see. We have a question from Aristides, I think from Greece, about the spatial resolution on river floods. Yes, indeed, for rivers, the spatial resolution of in the current workflows is relatively low, but there is space in the project for you to extend the existing workflows and use further detailed modeling. Yeah, the Kahlar on the question on the ultimate resolution of the maps. I think this was a question for you, Erika.
Yes, if I'm reading correctly, do you think that this underlying data sets, that one, right, will provide the necessary? Yeah, so as mentioned by Christopher before, we have different workflows. One is extreme precipitation, and then we have another one, which is floods, river floods and coastal floods. So in this case, we are aware that the resolution is not the best, but within the workflows, each of the steps encourage users to use their own local data. And actually, this is the second stage of the implementation that you're going to carry out in your risk assessment. You first do a pan-European, which the resolution is not the best, but then the idea is that you're able or think of ways of adapting this methodology with your own local data. Again, with the Catalonia example, we use Cordex, which the resolution with extreme precipitation is not the best, but when we cross it with their own local data, the resolution it improves. So once you do your own exercise, you might realize that your own local data actually is the one that will drive your analysis and it can help you. But again, this is the second stage of the work that you're going to carry out, and we are actually excited to see how it can be improved from a pan-European data set to your own local data.
Thank you, Erika. I think for the next question, you might also have more insights about the schedule of the sub-agreements, or maybe Daniel, if he's available. We have a question from Hakan. Can we give the schedule for the implementation of the sub-agreements?
Yes, so in the next couple of days, from this week or next week, we're going to start contacting for doing the subgrant agreement. We have a period of, I believe it's 2 months or so to finalize everything. From the Universitat Politécnica of Catalunya, we will be contacting you, and you can rest assured that we are trying to follow all the steps. So once we actually contact you, the process can be as straightforward and easy for you, the applicants. But if you have any specific question or something that is in your mind, please do not doubt in contacting us in the meanwhile.
Thank you, Erika. We have a question from Hedai. Welcome, Hedai. Would it be possible for us to learn about other organizations that have been awarded sub-projects under CLIMAAX? Yes, we will very soon openly announce the list of organizations that have been awarded the project. Also, from the autumn, we're going to start with webinars on that are introducing in more detail the different framework and the workflows and the handbook. But we are also considering that maybe we will organize in-person meeting in the autumn for the different regions to get to know each other. So you will learn more about it in the autumn. So I hope that answers your question. From Zabokos, what type of social economic factors can be determined and in which workflow? We have there are quite a lot of social economic metrics and also factors that can be considered. And one of our main partners, University of Amsterdam, has prepared a very detailed overview, and you can access this information in the handbook later on. We are also now having all that information is already available in one of the key deliverables of the project, so that also is going to be available to you. Dumitrake Ramona, can you share the PowerPoint presentation? Yes, I think that's possible, and we will also share the recording of this meeting, as Erika mentioned. Well, quite a lot of questions, so let's continue. But otherwise, also you can contact us and ask the questions directly. Also, to let you know that these questions are going to be collected, so we are building a frequently asked questions the database, so that you can also check that because a lot of questions are going to come up as you are getting started. Theodora, is pre-financing required, or is a donation received before each period? Erika, would you like to answer that, or Daniel?
Sorry, you mean if there is pre-financing? That's what you asked?
Yeah.
No, there's not. No, there's not. Each payment is done after the submission of the deliverable. So there is a schedule for that. So before the submission of the first deliverable, there won't be pre-financing.
All right, I hope this answered the questions. Nikos, the hazards existing in CLIMAAX are the only one, or we can incorporate others as well, such as geohazards? For now, we are at least in the first 6 months of the project, we are focusing on the hazard climate and the climate, natural climate hazards available in the project. To be considered later on, if, for example, something like landslides are to be developed, but let us come back to this question afterwards. I think at least in the first 6-9 months of the project, we're going to focus on the existing hazards. Oh, same question from Nikos. Sabolox, are we going to receive a step-by-step training on how to use a workflow? Yes, they're going to be, yeah, I don't know, support available, and also explanation by the workflow leaders on how the workflows are being set up in the handbook. But it's probably going to be an interactive process. So yeah, we are not going to take you. We are going to try to help you as much as possible, but we can't do the work for you. So
also, if I can comment on that, we are currently for you not to feel too nervous, because we understand that the workflows itself, and you see the coding and the technical aspects, this could be a really big of a burden, I would say. We're exploring ways on how to support applicants in the next few months, especially at the beginning of your risk assessment. So we're trying right now internally to explore if we make some sort of more technical videos just like this one, where you can to show up and we focus on a specific workflow, and instead of making it really illustrative as I showcased today, more hands-on, going to the handbook and trying to do step by step. Or if we're gonna do like drop-ins sessions in which as in a specific frequency, you can come up and ask some questions that you faced. But as I mentioned, we're exploring these options right now. And once we have set up a calendar and an idea on how we're going to do this, we're going to communicate it to you. But mostly this will probably happen after the summer, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you, Erica. Özlem, we are a data team. How can we integrate ourselves into CLIMAAX? Will there be a portal to discuss together with other teams? Yeah, I think Christopher is already answering the question in typing, but one of the support tools that we are that WF is putting in place is a forum, and under this forum, that under specific topics, you may come in contact with other colleagues in the project. And also the project itself is also connected with other data collection and initiatives at the European Commission level. So then we can also connect you to them when that is interesting for all parties. Zabolox, a step-by-step guide. So Erica already mentioned that. All right. Let's see. Monica, official project starting date. I would like to ask, when should Cascade funding beneficiaries start with the activities? When is the official beginning? Erica, would you like to add to that?
Yes, well, in principle, your activities can already officially start once the subgrant agreement is finalized and it's signed. So I would say that it's a go once that happens. And I understand that the second question is because this particular applicant has to go to public procurement, but then again, it's something that I would say beyond our control, that part. But we will try to speed up the process so you can start as soon as possible.
Hedaya, would it be possible for you to share contact information for points of contact based on your team's responsibilities when you have questions or need to consult? I will answer it, and then maybe Christopher would like to add to that. There are, in principle, 3 lines of support. One would be via a JIRA system, where every question we receive an ID, and this question is going to be captured by the ECMWF team, and then they are going to direct it to the specific expertise within the project. So you don't need to worry about that. You can ask the question via the JIRA, and then internally we are organizing ourselves. The second line of support is via the forum, where all the questions that are asked are also visible to the rest of the regions that are starting. So then that's also interesting because you can share experiences, and you can learn from each other, because most likely many regions are going to face similar issues. And then the third line of support is via drop-in sessions or personal meetings, where there is going to be space to lively discuss and ask questions, and then we will set up thematical meetings so that based on the topics that are going to need to be addressed, then you can see, and that's going to be announced, so then you can see if that's interesting for you to join or not. Christopher, do you want to add something to the support part?
No, you covered it. Like you said, for the support desk, if a question is asked there, we will take care of dispatching it to the appropriate place in CLIMAAX, and you will receive an answer from the right person for that. But that is essentially our job, to find that person for you and get you in contact with them.
Yes, and yeah, have in mind that the project is it's quite a long-term project. So yeah, now we all don't know each other, but as time progresses, you will probably get to know more the CLIMAAX team behind it. But for us to keep it manageable, we are keeping the internal division of work as an internal project activity. I see that there are no more open questions. Anybody else that wants to raise something? No. Well, I was very happy to see so many questions. So I hope that it sets the scene on the activities that are going to start. We are looking forward to get to know you, work with you, learn about the regions, and yeah, hopefully prepare better for climate impacts. We're going to meet, let you most likely now together with Erika and Daniel and the UPC team. There are going to be quite a lot of activities in setting up the sub agreement grants for the official part. We invite you to have a look at the framework and the available material for you to start preparing. If you have any questions regarding setting up teams, yeah, we are welcoming the questions, and we're going to try to help to the extent possible. But please be aware that you most likely know the local context much better than us. And yes, we're looking forward to see you in the autumn for the more in-depth webinars, and hopefully also to meet in person. Yes, if there are no other questions, I would like to thank you for joining. I wish you good luck with setting up the process and your teams, and also thank you to the internal team for the good preparation of this first webinar.